Welcome to the Leverage Your Potential podcast. This podcast is hosted by the Director and Assistant Director of Menlo College's Office of Internships, Career Services, and Study Abroad, Dylan Houle and Kelly Davis, in partnership with Menlo's Content Creation Club. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to Menlo College's Office of Career Services, Internships, and Study Abroad's podcast. I am one of your hosts. I am the Assistant Director of Career Services and Study Abroad, Kelly Davis, and I'm here with Dylan Houle, our Director. Dylan, do you want to say hello?
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our podcast. We're really excited to launch this for Menlo College and deliver you some great content on careers, professional development, and a few other things along the way.
Yes. So our primary goal for this podcast is to provide the Menlo community with tips on exactly what our office covers, which is internships, career services, and study abroad. So we'll be having discussions and conversations with students, faculty, staff, alumni, as well as our external partners about different industries and different experiences that people have had with these three elements of what our office covers. And we're really excited to launch this podcast. We're going to go ahead and start by just introducing ourselves, telling you a little bit about us and our career paths so that you get a basis for what the show is going to be about, which is really exploring what everybody's career journey is. So Dylan, I'll hand it off to you to go ahead and get us started.
Thank you, Kelly. Yes, it really is career journeys, and my own is no exception. I think everyone that embarks on a career is embarking on a journey, lots of twists and turns and lots of exciting developments along the way. And so I'm really excited for the opportunity to share my own story with you and for Kelly to share hers as well. So my career journey starts back in high school when I took a English class, ninth grade English class with Mr. Kimsey, a really exciting English teacher. He wore aloha shirts every day and shorts and went surfing on the weekends. And our classes really revolved around a lot of discussion and reading short stories, and it was really engaging. One of the takeaways from that in ninth grade was that I decided I wanted to be an English teacher. And for the rest of high school and through college, I pursued that as my career goal. In fact, in senior year of high school, I was given the superlative most likely to be a teacher. In college, I earned my bachelor's degree of English from San Francisco State University and did some student teaching my final year there. And after I graduated, I moved to New York City. The reason I moved to New York City was I'd always been drawn to big cities, hence why I went to San Francisco for college. And New York just seemed like the next logical step in terms of urban experience. Plus the fact that my mom had been born in the Bronx and my dad and my mom met in New York City in the late 70s. So I moved to New York City and pursued an internship, a couple of unpaid internships, doing some writing and editorial work while I was applying to the New York City Teaching Fellows. And the New York City Teaching Fellows was an opportunity for people without teaching experience to earn their master's degree in teaching during the evenings while teaching in a high needs school during the day. And so I was accepted into that program gratefully, and I went to Fordham University in the Bronx for my master's degree in teaching. And I taught 1 year in Lower Manhattan in the Lower East Side. And then I taught 1 year in Brooklyn in a neighborhood called East Flatbush. So if you have ever known any teachers, you know just how difficult of a job it can be. I was 22, 23 years old at the time when I was doing that. And at the end of my 2 years, I realized teaching middle school and teaching high school is not exactly as exciting as I thought it was going to be or as fulfilling as I thought it was going to be. So I took a year off from work, and that's one of the things that has really shaped my career going forward is that pause I took. like many people, we finish high school, we go to college, and then we enter our career, and we don't take a lot of time to pause or reflect on exactly the journey that we're on, either because we don't have the opportunity to, or we just never stop to think and do it. So I had the wonderful opportunity to take a year off in New York City and enjoy the city. I explored a few different career paths at that time, including freelance reporting for AOL and doing some content curation for an online directory and a few other things along the way. But what really changed my career was a company called Ladders. Ladders was an online job board from uh, similar to monster.com or indeed.com, and they reached out to me after I had posted my resume to their site, and they said, "We really like your resume. In fact, we have a resume writing team in-house, and we're wondering if you'd like to be certified and trained to do that." So I said yes, and followed this kind of bizarre left turn, and it's really turned into a wonderful career in career services. So I was a professional resume writer in Manhattan for a year for this company called Ladders. They're still around today. You could visit their website, and they're still doing what they were doing back in 2012 when I was with them, which is helping people find jobs. And after I earned my certification in resume writing, wrote 300 to 400 resumes over that year, I was beginning to think to myself, okay, so I have a master's degree in teaching and I have a certification in resume writing. Where do those two worlds meet? Where can I leverage both of those credentials and put them to good combination? And my conclusion was a college career services office is probably the best application of those skill sets. I will be able to teach students how to write a resume. And what I did then is I conducted informational interviews all over the tri state area. So, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and New York City. And Pace University in downtown Manhattan gave me an informational interview. I was able to learn a little bit about college career counseling from them. And a couple weeks later, they called me back and said, we actually have an open position, and we were impressed by the initiative you took with the informational interview. Would you be interested in interviewing for the assistant director of career services position? So that really got me on my journey into higher education. And I had a year with them. Then I returned to the West Coast and had a job at the University of San Francisco, private Catholic college in the city, where I worked on the Young Alumni Relations team. And then in July of 2017, I was fortunate enough to join the Menlo College team as the associate director. And in December of 2018, moved into the directorship role. And I've really enjoyed my experience here at Menlo College immensely. And it's given me a lot of good opportunities to learn even more about career services, career development, and a few other things that I wasn't expecting to learn about, but I'm excited to, like study abroad. So that's a little bit about my career path and the journey I took to get here and why I made some of the decisions I made and some of the kind of good luck opportunities that landed in my lap that I said yes to. So Kelly, I'd like to hear your story and how you got to Menlo College.
Of course. Thank you, Dylan. That was great. It's always great to hear your story. I've heard it a couple times now, but I especially love the point where you realize that you have a certification in resume writing and you also have a master's in teaching, and you think about, well, what can I do with both of these things that I've learned at these different points in my life, in my career? How can I leverage both of them? And so I hope that what students and anyone who tunes in kind of gets from what we say is identifying our own skills and expertise and figuring out what innovative ways we can move those forward for ourselves. So I'll go ahead and talk a little bit about myself. I am a local. I grew up just down the street from Menlo College, actually, and I went to Menlo Atherton High School, which is a public high school. Was a great experience. I really liked that large environment, and so I moved on to an even larger environment and got my bachelor's and my master's at New York University in New York City. I did a 5-year BA/MA program, which essentially means that in the last 2 years of my undergraduate degree, I completed 2 courses for my master's degree and then finished it up the following year. There were great scholarships attached to that, so it made a lot of sense for me. but doesn't necessarily make sense for everyone. And I'll kind of talk a little bit more about why it made sense for me at the time. So when I was in high school, going back again, I took AP European History. And that was a very difficult class with a very difficult teacher. But I really enjoyed it. I didn't do amazingly, but I loved what I was learning. And I think that that really did influence what my major ended up being in college, which was European and Mediterranean studies. I was really interested in history, but I was not at the time interested in US history. Later, I thought, oh, well, I could go back to that. So I ended up just focusing on Europe. And that was really great because I took classes that were more culturally focused as well as politically focused. And I discovered that I was less interested in history and more interested in kind of a more practical application of what I was learning. So I was more interested in the politics and policy route, which is what my master's ended up focusing on. So I did study abroad. I studied abroad in a couple of places, and New York University is very large and has a number of its own campuses abroad. So I spent most of my time abroad in Berlin, Germany. I was there for about 9 months in total, and I absolutely loved it. Ich spreche ein bisschen Deutsch, so I got a little bit of German in there. And it was overall just a really great experience that has definitely, as you can tell, informed my career path up until this point and likely will continuing onward. Another thing that significantly influenced me in my undergraduate years was that I was also a student activist. I started out as an activist with NYU Divest, which was a group that was trying to get NYU to divest from the fossil fuel industry. So environmental activism was kind of where I started. But my senior year, my last year as an undergraduate, the Student Labor Action Movement, who we were close partners with at the time, had a student debt campaign. And there was just so much conversation around student debt and how much college costs. And I thought that that was really interesting and a really big issue to solve. So that was going on at the same time that I needed to decide whether or not I was going to continue and get my master's. And what I realized I was really interested in was comparing countries where you do not have the same student debt issues as we do here in the United States, and looking at their higher education systems. So while I was getting my master's, my thesis focused entirely on looking at the funding of higher education and its impact on students in Germany and in Ireland, which was very interesting. And maybe there'll be a whole podcast on it, who knows? But that really informed my interests. I realized I really liked it. And so I finished up my master's in September of 2017 and ended up doing a little bit of traveling afterwards with every intention to remain in New York City, remain in this apartment in Bushwick, Brooklyn that I loved, and kind of stay there for at least 3 years. That was my goal. But after I had gotten out and seen a couple more places, I came back to that apartment I loved so much in Brooklyn and realized that that's not where I wanted to be. So I ended up coming back home and living with my mom for about 2 months, working at the local bookstore to save up some money, and got myself back out again. But ended up coming back because I realized I really wanted to be with my family. So that's what I did. And kind of in the interim, when I was figuring things out, I considered a number of different career options. I thought maybe I wanted to be a college counselor in a high school, helping students figure out which college to go to. I was looking really hard at that, and also looking at admissions counselors tracks so that maybe I could have that experience and then use that experience to become a college counselor in a high school. But life had a different path for me. So I ended up actually working here at Menlo in a part-time position in this office. I was the coordinator of career services and study abroad. And I happened to be starting at the perfect time. Of course, Dylan and I are extremely fond of Zach Osborne, who was the director prior to Dylan, and he was moving. So that position was opening up, as was the associate director role at that time. And after applying for that role, I became the assistant director. So really excited to be here now, and this position has really proved to be something that I want to do. I think I've gotten incredibly lucky. I really love coming and working with students every day. I love thinking about career services, and I love thinking about study abroad. So it's a great place to be for whatever comes next. And that's just a little bit about me.
Kelly, thanks for sharing that. And, one thing I know about your story that you didn't share is uh, that resonates with my own story, which is that you were connected to Menlo College through a mutual friend, right? Who was able to recommend you for the position here. And in my own case, when ladders.com reached out to me almost randomly to offer me the resume writing position, there's some synchronicity between our two stories, in that your career trajectory, your career path is often determined by things that you're not necessarily in control of. You can just set yourself up for the opportunity, but oftentimes it's our network or dumb luck, or someone coming into our life at the right time to make a referral or a recommendation that sets us up for a career path that maybe we were interested in, but weren't exactly sure how we were going to break into. So I always love that part of people's career stories, is kind of the randomness, the little sprinkle of randomness that can make a career really exciting.
Definitely, I agree with that. I actually came to find out more about positions at Menlo through a student at Menlo, which was
Mhm.
not the normal way of going about things, but it ended up it ended up working out. So I'm very grateful for that chance. So I think that now that we've wrapped up our career journeys, as it were, to this point, which there's a long way for them to go, we were just going to go through a couple of thoughts and questions before wrapping up this first launch of the podcast. So one of the questions that I have for you, Dylan, and I can chime in here too, is what do you think is one of the most important skills that we can bring to the table, especially in this day and age?
That's a good question. And just to clarify, is it a skill that we as career services professionals, you and I, can bring to the table, or job seekers or people in the workforce can bring to the table?
I would say job seekers.
Okay, excellent. I think, and it may come as no surprise to listeners who have done some research on career competencies and what employers are valuing, but the number one skill that you can bring to the world of work, and really to any situation, is critical thinking. And critical thinking is a very overused term, I would say, in some circles. But really, what is critical thinking? It is the ability to solve problems, and not just any problem, but problems you've never encountered before. Do you have the tool and the skill set to encounter a novel problem and come up with a novel solution? This is what employers are looking for, especially in an uncertain economy, which it seems we are heading into because of the coronavirus, and especially into an economy that is hallmarked by globalization and technological advances happening uh, at a speed the likes of which we've never seen before. So, what the workforce demands is people who can solve new problems. And new problems are being generated every single day. And I think we're living through that moment at a global scale. And it's kind of an easy application to see the people who are going to come out on top at this moment are the people who are going to come up with innovative, creative solutions to the challenges of this moment. And developing problem solving or developing critical thinking skills is challenging. It's almost something that you have to do through experience. And so what I would encourage students to do is, if this is something that sounds like you need to develop, put yourself into new situations as much as you can. Even though you may be at home We're not able to go out, network, try and do informational interviews with people on LinkedIn, take free online classes, read books that seem out of your interest area or subject matters that you've never really dove into before. The more you can expose yourself to new things, the more capable you will be to generate new solutions to new problems. So that would be my number one advice for job seekers is critical thinking, problem solving skills is what is going to carry the day in this economy and in any economy to come. What about you, Kelly? What do you think are some of the top skills or the top skill?
For me, I think that's something I've been thinking a lot about, especially in the past few weeks, which, for context, if anyone listens back on this episode, we are on, it's April 2nd, 2020. So we've been in the thick of what's happening with the coronavirus for a couple of weeks now. But I believe that this skill applies elsewhere and beyond that. And for me, that's adaptability and flexibility. And that's something we focus a lot on. And when we talk about studying abroad, is how when you are going out there to a different country and you are picking up a new language or a new transportation system or just new cultural tendencies, you need to be adaptable, you need to be flexible, and you need to be open-minded, and you need to be ready to understand that you and other people are coming from different places, and that you might need to make some changes to how you are behaving, just so that you can get along and thrive in that kind of environment. And I think it's something that we definitely need now as well. Kind of a different sort of application of adaptability is that we see a lot of people moving to use different technologies very quickly. So you have to be ready to learn. You have to be ready to pick up that new information so that you can be able to thrive in whatever new environment that you are in. So that's something that's really been on my mind, and part of the reason why I wanted to ask that question. I have another question, Dylan, if you're ready.
Mm-hmm.
It is, so what would your job be in a different dimension? And this is just kind of a fun one that I was thinking about. For me, I'll start with myself so it makes a little bit more sense. But I've always loved dolphins and whales. And when I was a lot younger, I definitely thought, oh, maybe someday I'll be a marine biologist. And every once in a while, I see some cool article or image or something, and I think, maybe I will go back to school someday and become a marine biologist, which makes utterly no sense for me because I am really bad at science, but it's something that will always linger in my mind as a nice thought. So Dylan, do you have something like that?
Well, just to share a recent experience that I had when you mentioned uh, dolphins. I recently got married in July, and we, for our honeymoon, went to Cabo San Lucas and swam with the dolphins. And it was really one of the most enjoyable and illuminating experiences that I've had recently, aside from my wedding itself. So I feel you, that resonates with me a lot. Being a marine biologist, I think would be a lot of fun and really a good commune with nature. For myself, one thing I always had in the back of my mind was editorial work, either editing at a magazine or even technical writing. One of the reasons I really enjoy resume writing is that it's a nice combination of creativity and technical writing, really figuring out how can I say what I want to say in the most efficient way possible, and being very ruthless with grammar, punctuation, word choice, etc. And I've always really enjoyed that, and I've thought to myself, if I could rewind just a little bit, I might pursue that more aggressively. I, in college, went a more literary route with my English degree, and I got my degree in English literature. But in retrospect, I realized that perhaps what I really enjoy is the workings of the English language. And if I were to pursue a different career path in a different dimension, that's something I would go a little bit more towards, is editorial work.
Nice. I can see that. Just for anyone who hasn't worked with Dylan before, he is very knowledgeable about grammar. I've learned a lot. um, so this next question leans more on the study abroad side. Is what is the next destination on your travel list? Somewhere where you haven't been before that you want to plan a trip for.
That's a really good question. It's certainly an interesting question in these times when we're not sure when we'll be able to travel again. But my wife and I had a trip to Australia planned for this summer, and we have some family there who are going to be celebrating a wedding. Unfortunately, that's been postponed, but I think that will be our next big travel is to Australia. My wife is half Filipino and half Mexican, and her Filipino side still lives in the Philippines, in Japan, and in Australia. So that side of the world, we want to spend a lot more time in over the coming years. We did have the opportunity to go to the Philippines, which was excellent, and I've never been to Australia, and I would love to. I would love to see that continent. Um, wishing for that to happen sooner rather than later. What about you, Kelly?
Absolutely. I have high optimism that we will be traveling again, whether it's in a couple months or more than that.
Yeah, yeah.
um, there are definitely a few places on my list, but I think that the one that keeps nudging further and further to a priority is Chile and Argentina, or sort of the more Patagonia area as well. But I have always thought if I were to go back and get a second bachelor's degree, it would be in Latin American studies. I just find it really interesting and want to delve in more into understanding the history and culture of that region. And Patagonia is also beautiful, so I would really love to do some hiking there. But that's next up on my list for sure. And then last but not least, Dylan, what is a book that you are currently reading that you'd like to share?
Yeah, that's my favorite question. A voracious reader, as I know you are as well. The book that I actually most recently finished was Tony Robbins' "Awaken the Giant Within," and it's a self-help book, a motivational book, however you might like call that category. But reading Tony Robbins was really inspiring and really motivated me to evaluate certain parts of my life where I'm not perhaps performing at optimal peak performance. And that is Tony Robbins' whole thing: peak performance. How do you get the most out of your day? How do you get the most out of yourself? And one of the topics of his chapters was called transformational vocabulary, and he was talking about just the words you use have the power to shape your emotions and shape your perspective on things. So one example he gave was, instead of saying that you're angry, you might say, "I'm a tad annoyed." And just changing how you verbalize your emotion actually affects how you feel that emotion. And that's something I've taken to heart a lot as in my daily life, and as we go through a time of uncertainty where we're all wrestling with lots of different emotions, and how we choose to articulate them is going to make a big difference in how we perceive this moment and how we respond to this moment. And it's something that we can apply to our life irrespective of whatever quote moment unquote we're going through. So that was really a great book. I recommend Tony Robbins to anyone, his books at least, who's interested in self-help and motivation. The book I'm currently reading is a little pivot. It's called Ireland by Frank Delaney, and it's a fictional book about the history of Ireland, told through a series of stories by a wandering storyteller in the 1950s in Ireland. And I'm just getting a start on that, 100 pages in. So I'll have more to share in a future podcast episode. But that's what I read, and that's what I'm reading currently.
I'm most intrigued by the book Ireland. I love reading that about histories as we think about what I almost studied for my bachelor's degree. Almost was history.
Yes, yes. I'll lend it to you when I'm done.
Excellent. Well, right now I am reading 2 books and then listening to a third. So I am reading on the fiction side, I'm reading Pachinko, which was, I believe, a winner of the Pulitzer Prize a few years ago, one of the big prizes. And it's definitely very good. It's a thick book, and I am moving through it quite quickly. And then for my nonfiction, I'm currently reading a book called Learning, Innovation, and the Future of Higher Education, which I think I saw a brief review of somewhere and thought that looked interesting, so managed to borrow it from the Bauman Library at Menlo prior to the shelter-in-place order. So I've been slowly working through that. I don't think it was geared towards me. It was geared more towards people with a background in pedagogy and a couple of other things, but I'm getting something from it. It's talking a lot about online education as it pertains to higher education, and the fact that it was published just a couple months ago is just fascinating because they're saying all of these things about online education, and here we are where some of these predictions might have been sped up a little bit in this time. So it's very interesting to read so far. And then I'm also listening to The Moment of Lift, which is by Melinda Gates. And so it's just really interesting. I don't know a lot about Melinda Gates other than she's Bill Gates' wife and is very big into philanthropy. So it's very interesting to hear about some of the projects that she's worked on as her time as a philanthropist. So that's what I've been reading. And that wraps up our first episode, our launching episode. Thank you so much for those of you listening in. Dylan, do you have any last words you want to say before we sign off?
Well, Kelly, I just want to say thank you for initiating this podcast project. I'm really excited to deliver great content to our students, our fellow staff and faculty, and to anyone else out there who's interested in learning what we're up to here at Menlo College and some of the advice that we have to share. So Dylan Houle, Director of Internships, Career Services, and Study Abroad. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you today, Kelly.
Thank you. Yes, I second all of that. I'm really excited to be launching this, and hopefully we'll be bringing more episodes to your ears soon. And so signing off here, this is Kelly Davis, the Assistant Director of Career Services and Study Abroad. Thank you all so much and have a great rest of your day. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Leverage Your Potential podcast. Episodes are posted weekly and can be found on our blog at blog.menlo.edu/career-services/. Make it a great day.